The laugh stopped the room before anything else did. Not loud, not even really a laugh. A short breath pushed out through the nose, the kind a man makes when he finally gets confirmation of something he's been counting on for months. My daughter Renee made that sound sitting 4 feet away from me in the conference room on the 9th floor of Halbrook and Sims, and every person at that table turned to look at her, because a will reading is not a place where anyone expects to hear satisfaction out loud. "Finally," she said, quiet but not quiet enough. I was sitting right there, 71 years old, in good health, very much alive. The man whose name was on the folder the attorney was holding. My daughter looked at that folder like it was already spent money. Then the attorney, a careful woman named Diane Kessler who had handled my affairs for 6 years, opened the envelope, read the first line, and went completely silent. Not the silence of someone reading, the other kind. The kind where a person reads a sentence twice to make sure they understood it the first time. That silence lasted 9 seconds. I counted, because counting is what steadies me when a room is about to change shape. Then my granddaughter stood up. "I have to take you back before I take you into that room, because none of what happened in those 9 seconds and the 60 that followed will make sense unless you understand what got built in the 2 years before it, and what a 15-year-old girl noticed that every adult around her had either missed or decided not to see. My name is Walter Coben. I'm 71 years old. I spent 43 years building Coben cabinetry and millwork out of a one-bay garage behind my house in Asheville, North Carolina. Starting in 1981 with a table saw, I bought used and a loan from my father-in-law that took me 6 years to pay back. My wife Marion ran the books at our kitchen table for the first decade, before we could afford an office, before we had 41 employees and contracts with builders across 3 counties, and a reputation good enough that people waited 8 months for a kitchen. Marion passed 2 years ago this past February. Pancreatic cancer, fast the way it usually is fast, 4 months from the first scan to the last morning. I still drive to the shop every weekday at 6:30 with coffee made, the way she made it, dark, no sugar, because keeping the ritual the same is one of the only things that keeps my days from tipping over. When Marion died, 2 things happened, and I didn't understand either of them clearly until much later. The first was that I found out how much of my own steadiness had actually been hers, borrowed, on loan, for 40 years. The second was that my daughter Renee started paying attention to me in a way she never had before. Renee is 46. She's a regional sales director for a medical supply company out of Charlotte, married to a man named Craig who sells commercial insurance. And for most of her adult life, her relationship to Coben cabinetry was the relationship a person has to a house they grew up in but don't live in anymore. She knew it existed. She didn't think about it much. There was no reason to. It had always just been there, the way a hallway is there. That changed after Marion's funeral. In the 6 months that followed, Renee started stopping by the shop on her way through town, calling to check in more than she used to, asking questions with the specific warmth of a daughter worried about her widowed father. That was one way to read it. She asked about the business too, though, about the contract book, about what the shop might be worth if I ever wanted to sell it outright instead of running it, about how inheritance usually worked for a business like mine, whether there were tax advantages to transferring ownership before I died instead of after. She asked all of this gently, the way you'd ask about anything, folded into conversations about how I was sleeping and whether I was eating enough. I told myself it was concern. For a while I believed that. I didn't think much more about it until about 14 months after Marion passed, when I sat down with my attorney, Diane Kessler, to update some paperwork, and she asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Walter," she said, "has Renee asked you anything specific about how the shop would be handled if something happened to you?" I asked her what she meant by specific. "I got a call 2 weeks ago," Diane said, "from an attorney in Charlotte, a man named Preston Yates. He said he was reaching out on behalf of a client with an interest in the succession planning for a family-owned business in Asheville. He didn't name the client. He asked about typical valuation ranges for cabinetry operations our size, and about how quickly an estate like that usually settles. I sat with that for a moment. I thought about Renee at my kitchen table 2 Christmases ago, back when Marion was still alive. The two of them talking quietly while I was outside splitting wood, Marion mentioning in passing what the shop was worth on paper because the subject had come up with the accountant that week. Renee had been in the house that whole visit. She'd have heard it, or most of it. "I didn't tell him anything," Diane said. "But I thought you should know somebody was asking. I want to tell you now about my granddaughter, because none of what happened later makes sense without her. Sophie is 15. She's Renee and Craig's only child, my only grandchild, and she has her grandmother's way of sitting in a room and reading it without announcing that she's doing it. Marion used to say Sophie had the quiet math, her phrase for a person who adds things up in their head and doesn't tell you the total until she's sure of it. Sophie started showing up at my house on Saturdays about a month after the funeral. Nobody arranged it. She just started coming, on her bike at first and later, once she had her permit, driving herself over with Craig's old truck. She never called ahead. She'd knock, come in, and start pulling out the ingredients for whatever Marion used to make on Saturdays. Usually a pot roast that never came out quite right no matter how many times we tried it together, and we'd eat and watch whatever black and white movie was on the classic channel, and she'd ask me questions. About 8 months after Marion died, she asked me if I ever worried about the shop, what would happen to it. I asked her what she meant. I mean when you're gone, she said. Or when you can't run it anymore. Does it bother you if it doesn't stay the way you built it? She was 14 when she asked me that. I told her the truth, that it was something I thought about often and hadn't fully settled yet. She nodded, the way she does, slow, considering. Then she said something that has stayed lodged in me since. Grandma told me once that the hardest thing for a family business to figure out is telling apart the people who built it from the people who just want what it's worth. I looked at her. She said that to you? About a year before she got sick. I didn't really get it then. She looked down at the table. I think I get it now. Marion had said that to a 13-year-old, planted it there without explaining why, the way she planted everything, trusting that the ground would hold it until it was needed. I thought about Renee's questions about valuation. I thought about the attorney Preston Yates calling Diane's office. And sitting across from my granddaughter at that kitchen table, I understood that Marion had known something I was only just catching up to, and that she had left an instruction inside a child because she trusted the moment would find it eventually. The moment was still 11 months away, though I didn't know that yet. If you're listening to this right now, and something in the last few minutes has landed somewhere close to home, if there's a house, a shop, a piece of land, 40 years of somebody's work that a family member has been circling with questions dressed up as concern, tell me where you're watching from tonight, your town, whatever state you're in. I read every one of them. And if this story has got its hooks in you already, hit subscribe now, because what happens in the conference room is the part that's going to make you glad you did. The will reading itself got scheduled by Renee, not by me, not by Diane. She called Diane's office in January, 11 months after that conversation with Sophie at the kitchen table, and asked, given my age, given that I'd had a small cardiac scare the previous fall, nothing serious, a stent, routine now, whether the family ought to formally review the estate documents. Before anything happened, she said, that required it. I was 71 and, aside from the stent, in good health. My cardiologist had cleared me in December with barely a note of concern. The shop was running well under Ray Delgado, my production manager of 11 years, who I'd been grooming to take over daily operations since before Marion got sick. Renee called about reviewing documents in January. Diane called me that same afternoon to tell me. Renee had said it was important for her own financial planning, Diane told me. Her own financial planning. I told Diane to schedule the reading, whatever date suited everyone. I told her to invite the whole family. Renee and Craig, my brother Hal and his wife from Knoxville, Ray Delgado, since I'd named him an interested party in the business structure. And Sophie. Diane asked if Sophie needed to be there given her age. I told Diane that my granddaughter had been present for every important conversation about this family's future for 2 years running, and that I needed her in that room. The reading was set for April the 9th, 10 in the morning. 3 weeks before that, on a Saturday, Sophie came for her visit quieter than usual. The specific quiet of someone working up to saying a thing rather than holding it in for good. We ate. We cleaned the kitchen. We sat down in the front room, in the 2 chairs Marion had picked out in 2016, that I have never once moved or reupholstered because they're exactly where she left them. Then Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a manila folder and set it on the coffee table between us. Grandpa, she said, I need to show you something, and I need you to tell me if I did the wrong thing. I looked at the folder. I didn't say anything yet. I've been paying attention since Grandma died, she said. To Mom. The way she talks about the shop, the calls she makes, what she says to Dad when she thinks I'm not around. She stopped, started again. I remembered what Grandma told me, about the people who build something versus the people who just want what it's worth. She looked at the folder instead of at me. 5 weeks ago, Mom had a phone call in the car. I was in the back seat with my headphones on, but they weren't actually playing anything. She didn't know I could hear her. A pause. She was talking to someone about the shop, about what it would sell for if it got liquidated instead of run, about whether the equipment and the contracts could get separated out and sold off faster than the whole business could be transferred, about whether there was a way to start that process before. She stopped. Before, I said. Before you couldn't stop it, Sophie said, very quiet. The front room was quiet the way Marion's front room was always quiet on Saturday afternoons. The good kind of quiet. I recorded it, Sophie said. My phone was in the cup holder, and it was already unlocked from texting somebody, and I just hit record before I really thought about whether I should. I've been trying to decide for 5 weeks whether to tell you. She looked up at me. I decided Grandma would have wanted me to. I picked up the folder. Inside was a printed transcript, 4 pages, single-spaced. Sophie had run the recording through a transcription app on her laptop because she is 15 and thorough in ways that occasionally astonish me. I read all 4 pages. Then I set them on the table, picked up my phone, and called Diane Kessler. Diane listened to what was on those pages without interrupting once, which didn't surprise me, since 22 years of estate law teaches a person that the most important information rarely arrives through the front door. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Walter, the reading's in 3 weeks. I know. I want to add something to the documents before then. Something specific. She explained what she had in mind. I told her to do it. She said she'd have it drafted by the following Friday. I told her to send 1 extra copy to an address I gave her. She asked whose. I told her. She made a note. Then she said, Walter, about the recording. I need you to understand something about how that can and can't be used. The SETI, and ADES. North Carolina allows one-party consent for recordings, meaning somebody in the conversation can record it legally. But Sophie wasn't part of that conversation. She was a passenger who happened to be there. I told her I understood that. However, Diane said, the recording isn't going to be the thing that goes into the estate documents themselves. What's going in the documents is what the recording confirmed was already true. The paperwork speaks for itself. The recording is context. Context, I said. And context, Diane said, has a way of becoming very clarifying to the people in a room once the documents are read out loud. On the morning of April 9th, I drove downtown to the offices of Halbrook and Sims. I took the elevator to the 9th floor. Renee and Craig were already seated when I walked into the conference room. My brother Hal and his wife arrived a few minutes behind me. Ray Delgado took a chair along the wall, and Sophie sat in the seat to my left, the way she always sits next to me now, with the specific stillness of somebody who has already done the hard part and is only there to watch what it does. Diane came in at 10:04. She set her folder down, laid the sealed envelope in the middle of the table, and looked around the room. Thank you all for coming, she said. This is a review of the current estate and business succession documents for Walter Allen Coben, Mr. Coben is present, and these documents reflect his current, fully informed intentions as of the date on this envelope. Renee looked back at her with the expression she'd worn walking in. Composed. Forward-leaning. The look of someone close enough to taste something they've been waiting a long time for. Diane opened the envelope. She read the first page. Then she went completely silent for 9 seconds. I counted, not because I needed to, but because counting has become the thing I do to stay steady inside myself when a room is about to tip. Diane looked up from the page. She looked at me. I looked back at her the way a man looks at a document he has already read once, in private, weeks earlier. Renee laughed, that short breath through the nose. Finally, she said. The room turned toward her, then turned back to Diane. Diane set the first page down and picked up the second. Read it. Set it down. Picked up the third. She wasn't smiling. Craig was watching Renee with something more careful than she had on her own face. My brother Hal, who'd been told the broad shape of things in advance, looked down at the table. Diane finished the third page and looked up. I need to read several sections of this aloud, for the record and for everyone's understanding. She read the business succession section first. Coben Cabinetry and Millwork was not to be sold, liquidated, or restructured for a period of 5 years following my death or incapacitation. It would continue under Ray Delgado as general manager, with a 3-person oversight board consisting of Diane Kessler, my brother Hal, and Ray himself, tasked with protecting the shop's operations through that 5-year window. Renee was not named to the board. Renee held no operational role in the business whatsoever. Diane read the second section, the personal estate. The house on Willow Ridge Road, where Marion and I had lived since 1994, would remain in trust for the same 5-year period. After that, it would transfer to Sophie on her 25th birthday, with a stipulation that it remain her primary residence for a minimum of 10 years and never be sold in that window. Not to Renee. Not to Renee and Craig jointly. To Sophie, the 15-year-old sitting very still in the chair beside me. Diane read the third section. A sum of money, which I won't state here, set aside for Renee and Craig in a trust to be administered by Diane's firm, released across 6 annual installments beginning 3 years after my death. Not a lump sum. Not immediately touchable. 6 years, gated by an attorney. By the end of the first section, Renee's jaw had gone tight. By the end of the third, it was the jaw of somebody holding something in that wasn't going to hold much longer. Diane set the last page down and looked around the table. Then Sophie stood up. She stood slowly, no performance in it. The same careful deliberateness she'd had setting that manila folder on the coffee table 3 weeks before. She reached into her jacket and took out a sealed envelope, addressed in her own handwriting to Diane Kessler, attorney at law, and set it on the table. "This is for you," Sophie said to Diane. "Grandpa knows I have it. Whether to bring it today was up to me." Diane looked at the envelope, then at me. I gave her a single nod. She opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note in Sophie's careful, slightly formal, 15-year-old print. Diane read the note without her expression changing, but something behind it did, the same thing that had happened 9 seconds after she first opened the will. "This is a recording," Diane said. "Yes," Sophie said. "Of a phone call?" "Yes, 5 weeks ago. I was in the back seat of my mom's car. She didn't know." Renee's hands went flat on the table. "The way you press down on something to keep it from moving." "Preston Yates," Renee said. Not a question. A name pulled out of somewhere she'd hoped would never come up in this room. "The recording and the transcript will be reviewed by this office as a matter of record," Diane said. "I want to be transparent that a recording made by a minor in a moving vehicle raises real questions about admissibility in any formal proceeding. I'm not presenting it as legal evidence. I'm presenting it as context." The same word she'd used with me on the phone 3 weeks earlier. And context tends to be very clarifying to the people in a room once the documents have already been read. The room was very quiet. Renee looked at me. 46 years of being her father. 15 years of watching her be Sophie's mother. "Dad," she said. I looked at my daughter, at Marion's chin on her face and my own eyes looking back at me, at 18 months of questions that had worn the costume of concern, and I said, careful, level, the voice I use when I need it to carry no heat, because heat is what an enemy looks for. And Renee was not my enemy. She was harder than an enemy, because she was my daughter. "I know what was on that recording," I said. "I want you to hear this from me, not from a lawyer reading a document. I built this shop for 43 years. Every contract, every employee, every piece of equipment we own, I built starting with a used table saw and a loan I paid back working nights for 6 years. I built it with your mother next to me at that kitchen table doing the books by hand before we could afford software. There are 41 families that depend on that shop right now for their living." I looked at her. "You were in a car talking about selling it out from under all of them before I was even gone." The room held what that cost to say. "I'm not going to tell you who you are in this moment," I said. "You already know. What I'm going to tell you is who you still have the chance to be over the next 30 days, and what that's going to require of you, and that I still believe you're capable of it, even knowing what I know now." I looked at Renee, at her hands still flat on the table. "That's all I've got to say in this room. The rest of it is between you and me, and it doesn't need an audience." Diane looked around the table, asked if there were procedural questions. There weren't. The reading ended at 10:51. I want to stop here for a second, because some of you listening right now have a Sophie in your life. Somebody 15, or 25, or 60, who's been noticing something nobody else was paying attention to, carrying it. Not sure whether to say it out loud. If that's you, or it's been you, tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me as much of your story as you're ready to say tonight. And if you've made it this far, go ahead and hit like and subscribe before you keep going, because what comes after that conference room is the part that made this whole story worth telling. Renee called me that evening. Not from the house, not with Craig in the room. From her car, in the parking lot of a grocery store on Tunnel Road, where she'd apparently sat for close to 40 minutes after leaving downtown before she felt able to drive the rest of the way home. I picked up on the second ring. We talked for a little over 50 minutes. She didn't start with an excuse. She started with silence, the particular silence of a 46-year-old woman sitting alone in a parking lot, trying to find the first honest sentence. Then she found it. "I wasn't thinking about the 41 people," she said. "I kept thinking about the number. Just the number." A long pause. "After Mom died, everything felt like it could come apart. The shop, the house, all of it. And I started thinking about what happens if it does, and how to make sure it didn't. And somewhere in there I stopped thinking about protecting it, and started thinking about what I wanted." Another pause. Longer. The call Sophie recorded. She stopped. Started again. "Preston kept telling me there was a legal way to move faster. And I kept listening because I wanted there to be one. And I just..." She didn't finish it right away. I didn't stop myself. "Your mother knew," I told her, quiet on the other end of the line. "She said something to Sophie about a year before she got sick. About the difference between people who build a thing and people who just want what it's worth. She said it to a 13-year-old because she trusted the girl would still have it when it mattered." "She knew," Renee said. "Not a question this time either." "She saw it coming before I did," I said. "She trusted me to catch up, and she trusted Sophie to be the bridge whenever the bridge was needed." "I didn't know she could see that far out," Renee said. Marion had always been able to see that far out. It was one of the things I loved most about her and never quite matched myself. That particular way she understood people better than they understood their own reasons. "The 30 days, I said. "What I told you in that room, I meant it." "I know you did." We talked another 20 minutes about what those 30 days needed to actually hold, not in the abstract. The call she needed to make to Diane, to start an honest conversation about what role, if any, she could legitimately grow back into someday. The conversation with Craig, which had to happen before she pulled into her own driveway that night. The conversation with Sophie, which I told her was hers to start, and that I wasn't going to script it or soften it for her, because it needed to be real. She said she understood. She said goodnight. She drove home. The conversation with Sophie happened not that next weekend, but the one after. Renee came to the house on Willow Ridge Road at 10 in the morning, Sophie's usual time, and Sophie was already there. I made coffee, took it to the back porch, and let the two of them have the kitchen to themselves. I don't know most of what got said. What I know is it lasted close to an hour and a half, and when they came looking for me on the porch, they both had that particular look people get when something necessary and hard and true has just been spoken out loud. Renee looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said to me, "She's got Mom's eyes." "Yes," I told her. "She has." "Mom would have liked how this went," Renee said. "I thought about Marion at that kitchen table 2 years before she got sick, saying something to a 13-year-old about builders and takers, planting it in the right soil, trusting the season to bring it up when it needed to come up. She'd liked how this was going to go before any of it had even happened. That was Marion. That was always Marion. Here's where things stand now. Coben Cabinetry is still running. The oversight board is active and meeting quarterly. Ray Delgado has been formally made general manager with full authority over daily operations, a title I'd been circling for 2 years that the estate process finally made urgent. Renee isn't on the board, but 7 weeks after the reading, she made an appointment with Diane, not to challenge the documents, but to ask what a real, demonstrated path back toward involvement might look like, given time and given proof that her intentions had actually changed. Diane called me afterward. "It's the right question," I told her. "I don't know the answer yet. Neither does Renee. But asking it honestly is where anything worth rebuilding has to start." Sophie still comes to the house most Saturdays. She's a sophomore now, taking a business elective at school that she says isn't half as useful as what she learned in that conference room on April 9th, which might be the most honest review of a high school class I've ever heard. She asked me not long ago what I thought Marion would say if she could see how it all turned out. I thought about it for a real minute. Then I told her Marion would probably say something short and a little sharp and probably funnier than either of us deserved, and then go right back to whatever she'd been doing, because she'd already seen it coming and already done her part, and the rest was always going to be up to the rest of us. Sophie laughed at that. The real kind. Unguarded. The kind that sounds like a person before the performance starts. She looks like her grandmother most, in the moments she doesn't know anybody's watching. I'm 71 years old. I built something for 43 years, starting with a used table saw in a one-bay garage in Asheville, North Carolina. My wife planted a seed in a 13-year-old girl a year before she left us. And on April 9th, on the ninth floor of a building downtown, that girl stood up and set something on a table that told everyone in that room exactly who had been paying attention the whole time, and who hadn't. Marion built that too. She built everything that mattered. Before you go, do me this favor. Hit like on this one. Subscribe if you haven't, because there's more where this came from. More 15-year-olds who stood up when it counted. More seeds planted in exactly the right person at exactly the right time. More envelopes opened in rooms like that one, saying something nobody in the room expected to hear. Every one of those stories deserves to find the people who need it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me where in the country you're watching from, your town, your state. Tell me your story. Whatever part of it you're ready to put into words tonight. This is a community full of people who understand what it costs to build something worth protecting and what it means to find right when you need it most. The one person who understood that before you did. My name is Walter Coben. I'm 71 years old. My wife planted a seed back in 2018, and it grew exactly when it was supposed to. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.